Chapter 43, Jewel of the Pile. Next morning, very early before it got too hot, we departed camp in the direction of what I had presumed to be a moo. Sure enough, there was a cow, but it was a dead cow lying on its side. The cow's body was very much on the scrawny side, and it was still warm. The cow hadn't been dead long. The moo we heard must have been its last. The years passed, and we kept coming up with similar results as we relentlessly scoured the planet. When we reached 8 years on the trail, I calculated we had covered about 1/3 of the planet. I asked Malachi, "Aren't you ready to go back to your house and home?" "Not really. One of the gangs has probably already burned it down again," he answered. There is that. His logic was impeccable. A few weeks later, we had completed a hard and difficult march through one of Sigma 2's many deserts when we happened upon a no-holds-barred, all-out fight to the last man, gang-type street rumble. We were about to discreetly make a bypass around the fight when a gang member cried out, "Hey, look, it's Malachi Jones." Everyone immediately stopped fighting and ran over to us. I had no idea what they were about to do, but I knew my TPE training would automatically kick in if things turned violent. I glanced over at Malachi, but he looked as cool as a cucumber. The gang members wanted Malachi's autograph. Apparently, he was the man they gave credit to for bringing Shakespeare to the masses. Inadvertently, we might add, as you are about to see. I asked, "What were you fighting about?" "We were fighting over Shakespeare. My name is Tungsten Tommy, and I'm the leader of the Shake It Up with Shakespeare gang. We really believe William Shakespeare wrote the plays attributed to him." "And I'm Johnny Steele, leader of the Bring Down the Bard Boys. We think William Shakespeare was a phony and somebody else wrote the plays." I blurted out, "The Earl of Oxford." "Who?" Several gang members said at once. "Never mind," I then asked, "How do you know about Shakespeare? And much more importantly, how do you know about Malachi? He lives thousands of miles from here." Excuse me. Another boy known as the Professor spoke up. "We know him through the book. The last gang that burned up his house saved the book from the fire. Photos of Malachi and a bunch of women were inside the book. His name was inscribed on the inside cover. The book and photos have been circulating all over the planet since the house burning." It was time for Malachi to say something. "The book he's talking about is my collection of Shakespeare's plays. The photos are of me and my 37 wives. I placed the photos in different sections of the book, correlating to what I thought of the marriage, comedy, drama, or tragedy." Chapter 44, Acts of the Actors. Before the boys left to go to their respective homes, we drew a shuffleboard court in the dirt, and using makeshift components, we taught them the rudiments of the game. The game seemed to catch their fancy and left us with the hope that a burgeoning love of shuffleboard would impel them to curb their violent tendencies. That night, sitting around the campfire, Malachi said, "You know, Nick, I think I found a purpose in life, and it's not trying to write better plays than Shakespeare. Yes, I know my plays stunk, but they were really all I had." I replied, "Don't feel too bad. You did try, but tell me about this new purpose in life." "Shakespeare and shuffleboard. I intend to wander around Sigma 2, engaging the warrior gangs and showing them the wonders of Shakespeare and the excitement of shuffleboard, and in so doing, finally bring peace to this God-forsaken planet." Malachi's voice was getting a little choked up. "Very noble and exciting in its own way. How do you propose to carry out your plans?" I asked. Malachi replied, "Shakespeare as well as shuffleboard in the park." "But there are no parks in Sigma 2. I hated to burst Malachi's bubble. But I didn't. He responded, "When we have the acting groups and when we have the shuffleboard teams, the parks will have to be built. A reverse field of dreams, I said. I don't think Malachi was familiar with my reference, but it didn't matter. In his mind, he had wandered off to his own field of dreams. I agreed to help Malachi with his project as long as it didn't interfere with my cow checking. We settled on a 5-year schedule where we would continue to work and travel together, spending equal amounts of time on our separate projects. At the end of 5 years, I would cut him loose, and then he, Shakespeare, and Shuffleboard would have to sink or swim on their own. At the end of the 5 years, there were some hopeful signs that one day Sigma 2 would be violence-free. But that day was still many decades away. Malachi knew it, and he looked forward to the challenge. He had a real purpose in life, and if he was successful, they might name a desert after him. After Malachi and I parted, I spent another 12 and a half years checking on cows. There were plenty of dead cows, but healthy cows were few and far between. The moves were sparse indeed on Sigma 2. Maybe things will be better on Sigma 3, my final stop in the Sigma Draconis system. Chapter 45, Rolling Hills. As usual, and it really couldn't be otherwise because it really didn't exist, the SPNV placed me perfectly in the middle of the town square in Sigma Delta Pi, the capital city of Sigma 3, and the crown jewel of the Sigma Draconis system. Motorized vehicles were not allowed in downtown Sigma Delta Pi, which was a good thing because the streets were crowded with pedestrians and vehicles would have no room to move or maneuver. When I materialized beside a park bench, I was greeted with stares of unbelief and gasps of disgust. Unbelief because I appeared out of nowhere, and disgust because I was dirty, unshaven, and had on raggedy clothes, all thanks to 26 years of checking on cows on Sigma 2. My first stop would be a nice hotel, which turned out to be a no-go because a big convention was going on, and all the old hotel rooms in town were booked up for the next 6 weeks. So I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town whose accommodations were barely decent, but still better than any place I stayed on Sigma 2, except for the time I stayed at Malachi's home. On the way to the cheap motel, I had stopped at a dollar field marshal and picked up some clothes, as well as toothpaste, toothbrush, and shaving supplies. I anticipated there would be soap and shampoo at the motel. On the almost instantaneous SPNV trip from Sigma 2 to Sigma 3, I decided I was going to take 1 week vacation before resuming cow checking activities. You could call it a snap decision. After a good night's sleep and then a good breakfast, I walked to a nearby bait shop and bought a fishing rod and some bait. Then I ambled down to the Alsafi River, where I stuck the end of the fishing rod in the ground, released the bait back to nature, and then sat down and leaned against a Sigma oak tree. Just before dozing off, I gazed past the river. On the other side of the river were a series of gold and green rolling hills. I followed this strenuous routine for a full week. When the week was over, I checked out of the motel and took a taxi to the SDDC, Sigma Draconis Dairy Commission. In the hallway, I ran into Stalwart Jones, who, if you remember, and to be honest, I had to look back in the narrative myself to know where he was from the Tall City system and worked for the finest Colombian Dairy Commission. I asked him, "What in the world are you doing here?" Stalwart replied, "I could ask you the same thing, but I'm betting you're here checking cows." We laughed. Stalwart continued, "I'm here attending the Pharmacist to the Cows convention. We meet every 2,000 years. This year, it just so happened to be on Sigma 3. A thought popped into my mind. You don't know a Mark, a.k.a. Mark, do you? He's with the TBDC, Theta Buddhist Dairy Commission. Stalwart quickly replied, "Yes, of course I do. In fact, he's here with his lovely wife, Tammy, i.e. Tammy. I'm having supper with him tonight at the Royal Sigma Sushi Bar. Why don't you join us?" How can I say no to such a generous invitation?